Hi, PerspectaWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday, August 26th. Quite a comfortable start here in the Mid-Atlantic region to the last week of the month of August. High pressure remains close enough to stay in control today, again with comfortable temperatures and humidity levels just like we experienced all weekend long. Really a relatively quiet week expected here in the Mid-Atlantic region across the Northeast U.S., the Great Lakes. No excessive heat or humidity expected. No significant rain events. Really the only rain event of note right now, the way it looks through the next 5 days or so, will be a cold frontal passage on Wednesday night. There can be some showers and thunderstorms associated with that cold frontal system. It'll turn warmer on Wednesday, especially ahead of that frontal system, back into the middle 80s, but it doesn't look like we'll hit 90 degrees. Meanwhile, not too quiet on the tropical scene. A couple different waves to monitor over the next few days. There is a wave off the east coast that has yet to reach tropical storm status, but there is Tropical Storm Dorian just east of the Windward Islands. It's moving to the west, and it looks like it'll take a path to the west and then the northwest over the next few days. Here are the exact locations. This is a tropical wave right now that over the weekend started off right in this region right here, just to the east of Florida, to the west of the Bahamas. It did move over the Florida Peninsula. That inhibited strengthening for a while it was over land. Meanwhile, this system out here actually intensified into a tropical storm, became named Dorian, and now this particular wave has moved off to the north and east. Very likely will intensify over the next day or two, and it too can become a tropical storm. If so, it would be named Aaron. It's continuing to move slowly to the north and east, and it's an interesting system because it may play a role in ultimately what happens to Tropical Storm Dorian. Right now, again, this is moving to the west. It has sustained winds at 60 miles per hour, not all that far away from a potential hurricane status. That's not out of the question over the next couple of days. It'll move to the west and then likely start to turn to the north and west and cross over. It looks like it would cross over Hispaniola, and that certainly can weaken it. Hispaniola has some rugged terrain, some higher mountains, and there's often quite a bit of shear for any system that moves on top of that particular island. So if indeed it moves over that island, it could be the end of the tropical storm, or it could diminish it down to tropical depression status, at which time it could exit over the Bahamas, and then it's just too early to say what will happen if it does survive a trek over Hispaniola. Could also ultimately end up slipping into the Gulf of Mexico. Way too early to say on that as of now, but we'll talk about the factors involved in this system over the next couple of days here. For example, there's a lot of dry air right now out over the Caribbean. That combination with a move over higher terrain in Hispaniola can certainly cause it to weaken later this week going into the Labor Day weekend. But two systems on the board as we begin the last week of the month of August. Well, let's take a look at a couple of maps from the University of Wisconsin, the CIMSS website. Very useful tool for tropical cyclones. First of all, on satellite image, fairly impressive look right now to Tropical Storm Dorian here as it closes on the Windward Islands. This chain of the Windward Islands here, and here is the Caribbean. All this orange and yellow represents drier air that really pushed off the west coast of Africa from the east to the west. It's Saharan desert air, and it is an inhibiting factor for tropical storm intensification. So that is one factor that this tropical storm will encounter. And again, if it indeed moves over this island right here, Hispaniola, that has some rugged terrain, so that too can not only inhibit intensification, but it could really rip it apart. Oftentimes there's quite a bit of shear with the system moving over mountainous area, as is the case here, and whether or not it survives and makes it out over in this region, a little too early to say, but those are a couple of the factors that we'll monitor: the exact track, if indeed it moves over Hispaniola, and the dry air out ahead of this tropical storm. Now again, It could very well become a hurricane. It's not all that far away. Maximum sustained winds right now, 60 miles per hour. If hurricane status is reached, it will probably be right in this region right here, right after it enters into the eastern Caribbean Sea. Meanwhile, our second system, right in this area right here, slowly moving to the north and east. It can intensify and become a tropical storm over the next couple of days. If so, it would be named Erin. Well, here's another neat product from the CIMSS University of Wisconsin website. Again, very good site for tropical cyclones. It's basically a water vapor type of plot here. What we're looking at is total precipitable water, but you can look at it like a water vapor map here. And this whole area in here is more moist. Here is the moisture associated with Tropical Storm Dorian as it's moving to the west towards the Caribbean Sea. And here's a relatively large area of moisture off the eastern seaboard. Again, that system is slowly moving to the north and east. This system right now moving due west at 14 miles per hour, but it should start to take a turn to the north and west after it enters the Caribbean Sea. But notice also drier air out ahead of it. We just saw that map a moment ago from the Saharan desert in Africa. It's moved all the way across the tropical Atlantic into the Caribbean Sea. So a lot of dry air out ahead of this particular system. Now, it could slow down and kind of avoid getting weakened by that drier air. We'll just have to wait and see over the next couple of days. But again, it will encounter both drier air over the Caribbean Sea and a potential track over rugged terrain of Hispaniola. Now, we've often talked about the sea surface temperatures in the western Atlantic, for example, and how important of a role they can play. First of all, in the Caribbean Sea, basically a mixed bag, really near neutral or even some cooler than normal waters in the Caribbean Sea. But notice up here in the western Atlantic, off the eastern seaboard, all the way across out to just north of the Bahamas, quite a bit of warmer than normal air. Basically warmer than normal in the Gulf of Mexico. And again, there's entirely a reasonable scenario that Tropical Storm Dorian slides and survives and makes it all the way into the Gulf of Mexico in about a week or so. And we'll have to monitor that possibility. Now, one other note here, when Hurricane Barry, basically a tropical storm, brief time hurricane that moved into Louisiana back in July, when it moved over the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it flipped it from well above normal temperatures to actually below normal. Not all that uncommon if a tropical system slowly moves over some water. It churns the water and basically through a process called upwelling brings some colder water from underneath to the surface. And that is something that we'll have to watch for with this tropical wave out here in the western Atlantic. Again, situated right about in this region right here as it moves to the north and east. If it's slow enough and does intensify, it can actually have an effect on the sea surface temperatures. And if the second system actually turns up this way, it can be a determining factor in what happens down the road. So again, that's kind of why all not certain yet as to what happens with this tropical storm down here. Part of it depends on exactly what happens up in the western part of the Atlantic Ocean with our initial tropical wave. Here is, for example, the map of the sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico just before Tropical Storm Barry moved across the northern Gulf states into Louisiana, briefly became a hurricane. But notice the entire area really above normal in terms of sea surface temperatures, all these yellows and oranges. Now let's take a look at what happened after the passage of Barry. And here we go. Look at that. It just dropped the sea surface temperatures in the northern Gulf through the upwelling process after that hurricane slowly moved over the northern Gulf waters and then over the northern Gulf land mass of Louisiana. So again, something we'll watch for in this part of the western Atlantic with the current system out there that again could become a tropical storm itself over the next couple of days. Well, let's take a look at last night's 6E GFS model run for the continental U.S. first of all, and the western part of the Atlantic. First of all, here is the tropical wave off the eastern seaboard, slowly moving to the north and east over warm waters, as we just saw a moment ago. And here's the reflection of strong high pressure over southeastern Canada. New England actually has kind of a cool air damming pattern here to the isobar pattern that we often see in the winter time, with strong high to the north. Very comfortable temperatures, and humidity levels continue today in the mid-Atlantic region. Let's now push forward here, and here's that system. It's a slow mover. It will have a chance to intensify here. Here we go now into the day on Tuesday. Still somewhat of an influence by that departing high pressure system. Here is the tropical wave off the eastern seaboard as of tomorrow morning. And again, a cool frontal system approaching. We'll warm up ahead of that frontal system. Here we go into the day on Wednesday. Notice still kind of sitting and meandering in this part of the western Atlantic is that initial wave right now. Again, it would become Tropical Storm Erin if it intensifies somewhat over the next day or two. And here's that relatively weak cool frontal system headed our way on Wednesday. We'll probably jump up into the middle 80s in D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, confined to the 70s today for highs, and then some showers and thunderstorms possible later Wednesday into Wednesday night. And here is that wave still just sitting off the eastern seaboard as of Thursday morning. And then what happens to the second tropical storm here? A little early to say, but ultimately it could end up over the Bahamas if indeed it survives, and that is certainly not certain right now whether it would survive that dry air in the Caribbean, potential track over the rugged terrain of Hispaniola. And here we go right towards the Labor Day weekend. Right now the signs are pretty positive for a decent start, at least a decent start to the weekend of the Labor Day weekend here in the mid-Atlantic region, with high pressure in control, and it could stay relatively warm during the upcoming weekend. Then we'll have to watch down in this particular zone here, the Bahamas, the southwestern part of the Atlantic, and the Gulf of Mexico. There will be a frontal system also that we'll have to deal with. Here we are on Saturday. The frontal system will kind of stall out, and that too can pave the way for some activity over the Gulf of Mexico. So relatively quiet week in the mid-Atlantic region, starting off very comfortable. Turns warmer, more humid by midweek ahead of the next frontal system. Meanwhile, one tropical wave off the eastern seaboard, and Tropical Storm Dorian about to head to the Windward Islands and then towards the Caribbean. We'll, of course, monitor both systems closely over the next few days. That's it for now. For PerspectaWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.